Welcome to Atomic Life. I'm Kurt Havens, and we're here again with Nicholas Weir. What's going on, Nick? How you doing?
Not much. Hey, just usual Friday night, kind of just relaxing and just winding down for the day.
So you're in Thailand, and I'm in the US. So we're like entirely different days, basically. So today we were going to discuss IGF-1 and its associated binding proteins and how they play a role in bodybuilding and fitness, specifically, not so much in health. So IGF is a protein that's encoded by the IGF-1 gene, and it contains 70 amino acids in a single chain with disulfide bridges. And the structure of it is actually very similar to insulin, and that's where it got its name from originally. It's produced by the liver in response, mainly in the liver. It's produced locally as well. The production is stimulated by growth hormone, and it is bound to one of 6 or one of 7, depending on who you ask, binding proteins, similar to the way testosterone or estrogen can be bound to sex hormone binding globulin. We could dive into what the binding proteins do out of the 6 of them. We won't get into the 7th one, and what the kind of effects of IGF-1 are, right? So my understanding is that the majority of the effects from growth hormone are actually mediated by IGF-1. There are some effects that are strictly growth hormone related, but the majority of the effects that bodybuilders are chasing are basically IGF effects, right? Yeah. And this is determined by how much basically IGF you can produce in response to growth hormone. So do you want to talk about some of the binding proteins?
Yeah, sure. So like you said, there's 6 of them. IGF binding protein 1 all the way through to 6, so 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And they're found in different tissues within the body. Some are more important for certain functions, but the 2 that we're most concerned with, I'm sure you'd agree, is the IGF binding protein 1 and 3. IGF binding protein 3 is probably the most abundant one found in the body. It's synthesized in the liver, and it basically circulates the bloodstream. It's found in a bunch of different tissues, and it helps regulate the IGF-1 bioavailability. So basically, we want more of that. It helps make the IGF-1 bioavailable for the actual functions that we want IGF-1 to be used for. And then the IGF binding protein 1 is the one that, like you mentioned in previous episodes on your channel and also on who was Todd and Paul's channel, women have high levels of it, and a lot of it has to do with their different hormone ratios. And it'll basically inhibit or limit the bioavailability of IGF-1 and has a bit of a, I suppose, inhibitory effect on muscle growth.
Yeah. So the IGF binding protein 1 it's not that it's a newer discovery, it's a newer concept, I think, in bodybuilding, where a lot of people misunderstand this. So we were, like you said, we talked about in other videos, and I think you and I touched on it previously. It's where people go wrong with the trenbolone data in cattle when they try to translate this to humans, and also with running estrogen rampant, right? So the new trend in the last 10 years seems to be everyone wants to elevate their estrogen, assuming that it's going to cause more growth, because the initial studies show that aromatizing steroids do cause more growth, but what they're missing is there's a big limiting factor there, right? And there's a range that's effective, and after that range, you're not really getting anything. In fact, you're inhibiting it. And this is so with the cattle data with trenbolone, they'll administer estradiol with trenbolone and the cows continue to grow. Most studies show that when estrogen is given, the cows grow more versus with trenbolone alone. There are studies that also show the opposite, but the majority of studies show that the estrogen is important for the cattle. What is lacking is cattle don't produce, or ruminants don't produce, insulin growth factor binding protein 1, where humans do. Mm-hmm. And like you brought up, this is kind of, it's kind of what you see in humans, where women have more growth hormone circulating, but they have less IGF, versus men tend to be the opposite. And so we're still working on establishing an estrogen range, but it seems that really much over 80 estradiol is inhibitory toward IGF, regardless of what the blood levels show. We could also touch on how the testing kind of falls short too when you look at these numbers.
Women do have higher levels of IGF binding protein 1, and it's a large reason why they have a higher GH to IGF-1 ratio as opposed to men, who tend to have a more favorable one for building muscle. I mean, it makes sense if you look at the I suppose the physical characteristics of a male versus a female, like the reason why we have more muscle tissue, more muscle cells as well. I think a lot of that has to do with more hyperplasia that probably occurs in puberty, provided that you're at a healthy body fat level as a teenager. I think there can be a bit of variance. Like, so when we say women have high levels of IGF binding protein 1 and high levels of growth hormone, low levels of IGF-1, it's just a generalization. Like, it can vary person to person. Like, women can obviously have higher testosterone or higher androgen levels and lower estrogen levels sometimes. Same thing with men, they can have higher estrogen levels, and a lot of that can be impacted by their body composition. So say you've got a very obese teenage boy, he's probably going to have an IGF-1 binding protein level and a growth hormone level more resemblant of a female, and vice versa. So that's why you do get a little bit of variance in the gene pool. But yeah, these are kind of like generalizations for the majority of people.
It is kind of an interesting thing, though, how it naturally is going to limit growth, though, right? So it shows why in nature the elevated estrogen is basically going to limit our growth, right? With that, as a bodybuilder, you don't want to let your estrogen get super high. It's definitely going to be limiting in the amount of IGF that's produced versus IGF binding protein 3, right? Which, like you said earlier, is kind of needed. I think the interesting thing is when you test IGF serum, I don't know, when was the last time you did your serum IGF?
It would have been in Australia. I didn't get it because it was quite an expensive test over here. Yeah, in Australia, I think, and we use a different reference range. Like, we use a different unit of measurement to like Americans, so wouldn't even really be worth mentioning. But it was somewhere toward the high end of the range from memory. But I was only on 2 A's of growth hormone at the time. So
I did a video yesterday with Chance. We were talking about HGH. The four of us that were on the video were mentioning where our serum IGF were, and they were all over the place. And it's kind of interesting because I think within an individual, it shows how things are working, but I don't think you can compare two individuals, right? So mine, I only have one kidney, and the kidneys are where growth hormone is basically broken down. So I'm not excreting it at the same rate as a person with two kidneys. So my IGF tends to run higher than a normal person, but that doesn't mean I'm bigger or more muscular per se, because I might have more of these other binding proteins that are rendering it useless, where mine on paper almost looks like I would be a giant, right? And Chase, who's much larger than I am, his IGF in his serum was like 150 to 200. So it's considered low, but yet he's 280 pounds. So it shows that like just testing serum IGF is not necessarily the way to determine the outcome that you're going to get from growth hormone or what's actually going on inside of your body. Right? Like, I get guys that want to test. I understand the theory. Guys that want to test to see if their growth hormone is legitimate. So they want to inject growth hormone, and then they want to go have their blood drawn and then want to see where their IGF is. I get that there, in theory, should be a response, but it doesn't always mean there will be. You can get a response from it, and it still doesn't mean the growth hormone's any good. I touch on this in my book that even damaged growth hormone will raise IGF in serum, but it doesn't mean it's doing anything, if that makes sense.
And I think that's an important point. Like, and it just goes to highlight the power of genetics. Like, genetics plays a major role. Whatever your serum IGF-1 reading is, or even the same applies honestly for testosterone. Like, you can have like a serum testosterone reading at a certain level. The amount of people that I've seen that have had, like, say they'll take the same dose as me, they'll have a higher level, but they'll be way smaller than me, or vice versa. And a lot of that, I think, has more to do with your receptor density, that sort of thing. And then on top of that too, I mean, well, similar, like, I mean, when it comes to testosterone, because you're dealing with testosterone binding to the AR, here we're dealing with how many IGF-1 binding proteins do you have, how many IGF-3 binding proteins do you have, like, to basically bind to the IGF. That'll more so determine, like, yeah, what kind of response you get out of it, I think. So say you got somebody who's got like through the roof levels of IGF binding protein 3, and they've got a high IGF-1 level, and they've got next to no IGF binding protein 1, they're probably going to have a pretty big physique. Like, there's probably going to be a bit of a relationship there. Whereas, yeah, like you said, if somebody has a stupid high IGF-1 level on paperwork, but if they have a higher than normal level of IGF binding protein 1, then there's a likelihood that they might just have more than likely just like an average or slightly above average IGF-1 level when we look at the actual bioavailable IGF-1.
Yep. Yeah, because what really matters, it's the autocrine inside the muscle is what matters. And most people aren't going to get biopsies to see what theirs is, what their level is inside the muscle. That's actually what's going to affect it more so than what than like the endocrine level. That's what I was. The endocrine level is what's in your blood. That level doesn't necessarily mean anything. That's not what's actually causing the growth per se. It's more the autocrine, what's inside the muscle. Most people are not going to get biopsies to check on that level. I can walk through what the different binding proteins do just so people can understand. Binding protein 2, it's known for its role in promoting cell growth and survival. It can either enhance or inhibit the actions of IGF. So that's one of the ones that, depending, it can go either way. It depends on what organ it's in. It's located in a couple different places. It's involved in embryonic development and tissue repair. On a side note, the IGF is the only times that it's not super elevated is in infancy and in very old age. For the rest of life, it tends to be much higher. IGF binding protein 3 is the most abundant, which we talked about, and it plays a major role in regulating IGF levels. So that's the positive one. IGF-4, binding protein 4, it's possibly inhibitory and it's possibly stimulatory, similar to 2. It can enhance the effects and the actions, and it has more to do with like the skeletal system than anything else. Yeah. Binding protein 5 is regulation of cell growth and development. It has a high affinity for IGF-1, so it can either, again, it can enhance or inhibit the actions. It's associated with bone development as well, and regulation of cell survival. Binding protein 6 is known for its inhibitory effects on IGF action, except it's the least common.
But it's got the highest binding affinity because it is the least common, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, but I believe it's the least common, though, in the human body. So even though it's totally just inhibitory, it's not. It's similar to 1, but it's just a lot less common.
In men, IGF binding protein 3 tends to be the higher or the more dominant one. And yeah, it plays, I suppose, the biggest role in creating bioavailable IGF-1 and just transporting it to the various tissues of the body, so it can obviously be locally utilized. So, I mean, that's the one that's going to play a big role in delivering the IGF-1 to the skeletal muscle for growth, or I guess you could say for hyperplasia, if you want to kind of put it in that kind of context. And then, yeah, IGF-1 binding protein 1 in females tends to be a lot higher. And it just helps basically regulate the bioavailable IGF-1, because having a high IGF-1, high bioavailable IGF-1 isn't actually conducive for the health of a female. Like, it can be quite detrimental to overall health and well-being. So I guess this is biology's way of balancing out the levels of everything and making sure that homeostasis is maintained in both men and women.
The biggest difference I think that we now see is they used to think elevated IGF-1 was not a good thing for prolonged life, right? They used to equate these things with lower calorie diets with lower IGF, right? IGF responds to food is one of the things that increases IGF. They would do these studies on rats that would show that the less they fed them, the longer they would live because their IGF was lower. What they've come to learn is that we are not rats in a cage because we live in an uncontrolled environment. For men, at least, the risk of getting injured, which tends to correlate with low IGF-1, actually will shorten your lifespan, versus women, like you were talking about earlier, women don't do as well with higher IGF-1. It can lead to other diseases and things that men wouldn't typically get from elevated IGF, like cancers. Another interesting thing about IGF is it binds to 2 different receptors. So it has its own receptor called the insulin growth factor 1 receptor, and it also binds to the insulin receptor. Not with the same affinity as insulin, but its effects are kind of interesting, and it's possibly what aids in the fat loss effects that we see from much larger amounts of growth hormone than would be expected, right? So like you and I were taught that growth hormone kind of capped out with its effects on fat loss, 1.7, 1.8 units for most people. You're a little larger, so maybe 2 units in someone your size. From use, you notice that, 6 units burns more fat, 8 units burns even more fat, 10 units burns even more fat. So what's actually occurring? And it seems that it's IGF actually binding to the insulin receptor and stopping fat storage, right? So you're still netting out with fat loss, but it's not directly causing fat burning, as there's no IGF receptor on a fat cell. So IGF itself technically can't burn fat, but it can reduce the amount of fat that's stored.
Yeah. And so almost, I guess we could kind of make an analogy to how yohimbine works in like relationship with clenbuterol. When you run them together, like, it's the reason why we see that, because of the inhibitory effect of the yohimbine being an antagonist.
Yep.
So we can always look at IGF one as kind of like a lipogenesis antagonist. Like it kind of antagonizes the ability for the body to generate fat tissue by preventing that storage mechanism. So you get the liberation of fatty acids from the growth hormone initially, and then once the growth hormone is no longer elevated, IGF-1 obviously increases. You get the inhibition of that restoring of the fat. So yeah, it makes sense. Like use a bunch of growth, liberate a bunch of fatty acids in the bloodstream, but then obviously it's going to put a lot of fatty acids in the bloodstream which need to be used. So you need to obviously be physically active or using that energy, which I mean, I suppose is the reason why people take it like a few hours before fasted cardio, like before bed too, because when they wake up and start being active, they're going to have all those fatty acids in the bloodstream. And if you fast for the first half of the day, then you'll be able to utilize a lot of that. And so you're going to get this like expedited rate of fat loss. So like you said, when it binds to the insulin receptor, it has an inhibitory effect in terms of storing or the restoring of fat that's been liberated from the actual body. And then it helps with growth via like the whole hyperplasia mechanism. I mean, I know it's really debated like whether or not it causes hyperplasia taking growth hormone, but I think it does. I mean, it's a bit difficult to refute it when you see all the anecdotal evidence. I mean, maybe that's something we can touch on a little bit. Like, do you personally think that it causes hyperplasia? Because I definitely do at high doses.
Yeah, I think it definitely causes extra cell fusion. I would say growth hormone on its own doesn't build muscle, right? It's anabolic in theory. Most studies show that it causes whole body protein levels to increase, but that doesn't necessarily yield any new muscle per se, right? It builds other connective tissues, but it's not building. Whereas IGF over time, you definitely see new cells.
And what elevates IGF? Growth hormone.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a signaling hormone. Like it's the downstream effects of growth hormone that lead to growth, not growth hormone itself.
Yep.
So it's all the stuff that comes after growth hormone that we're interested in.
Yeah, because in theory, growth hormone it's technically a catabolic hormone, right? It's a stress response to lack of food versus IGF is an anabolic hormone, which causing buildup of tissue. I think the only interesting thing about that statement is that growth hormone, while it causes the breakdown of tissue, it does build up collagen. So, and some protein source. So it's probably the only actual catabolic hormone that does kind of has both roles, and then the stimulatory effect on IGF obviously is anabolic as well. The data on the injection site might be contradictory to what bodybuilders find. I don't know what your experience with IM versus sub-Q. So clinically, growth hormone is used subcutaneous, and it's not typically. I mean, it's been studied intravenously. It's been studied intramuscular. Intramuscular causes a higher peak and a faster peak. What its effects are in studies on muscle growth don't really add up to what bodybuilders seem to find the case. Do you have any experience with using IMGH?
I did it briefly. I also did it briefly when I was using that highest dose, and I do think it had a bit of a effect on localized growth. I definitely do. But I mean, n equals 1, that's my opinion. I don't really think I'm a large enough sample size to kind of base an opinion off. Yeah, personally, I think there's merit in it. Whether that's the case or not, that's yet to be determined. I mean, if we had, say, a control group of 100 individuals, 100 bodybuilders or 200 bodybuilders that did it, and we were able to gather data from that and come to a conclusion, then yeah, I'd be more confident in making a statement about that. But yeah, it's worthwhile. But I don't know about you. Have you ever tried it?
No, but it seems like it does cause, like you said, some localized growth. So I think it could be used for spot growth for something that was lagging per se. But I think you might be missing, not you, but I think using it that way strictly you might be missing overall growth as a whole, right? Where you're going to just focus on one particular muscle. So if you were just to use your triceps might grow, but you might lack other areas of growth versus when you use subcutaneously, it should cause total body growth.
The way I approached it was when I was doing it locally, intramuscular, whatever body part I was training on that day for my peri-workout growth, I'd take it locally. Before bed, subcutaneous, and in the morning, subcutaneous, because it made sense to me in that sense. Like I was taking a few hours before fasted cardio. I wanted to lipolyze fat, so I wanted to put it in the fat tissue. And then before bed, you're looking for that systemic growth. You're also looking for that systemic recovery. And so it just made sense for me to do it sub-Q before bed. And also a slightly slower release, timed better with going to sleep, because obviously you don't go to sleep immediately when you lay down in bed. It takes, 30 to 45 minutes to kind of fall asleep. So it just seemed to work well for me.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
seems we're probably going to get questions on when it reaches peak and all these things. So at least from subcutaneous, it takes 3 to 4
3 hours.
hours for growth
Yeah.
hormone to absorb fully. So I think, and you and I have talked about this before with fasted cardio, I would say if someone's going to use it with the intention of doing fasted cardio in the morning, it almost makes more sense to me to inject the growth hormone at night sub-Q. And that way the levels actually be elevated by the time they're awake versus injecting in the morning and doing cardio. You're hours short of it being elevated. I would say IGF as well, right? It depends on the studies and how it's administered. Growth hormone to get IGF elevated, it seems anywhere between 30 hours elevated and 8 days. I've seen both. So I kind of average that out. So right from your last injection of HGH, IGF should be elevated for almost a week in most cases. I don't know if you've ever tested that far out. I know you were saying it's expensive in Australia to test for that.
Yeah, it's quite expensive test, like relative to the other kind of tests that you could select. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it would be if I were to test it. I'm sure it'd still be just as elevated. Yeah, several days later. Yeah, with the growth hormone, like for faster cardio, I always say to people, like, if you're one of those people that wakes up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet, that's what I've heard most people do. They'll just take it when they get up to go to the toilet, because that way they go to sleep, they wake up 3 hours later, 4 hours later, do their faster cardio, and you basically have all those fatty acids liberated into your bloodstream, ready to go to be used as an energy source. And then, if you don't eat, say abstain or delay your first feeding or your first meal for the first couple hours post cardio, you're going to be able to use all of that energy that you've liberated in those hours prior to doing the cardio. And then, you're basically accelerating fat loss as a result of that.
When you were using your largest dose, were you splitting up the dose or were you doing in one bolus?
Yeah, so splitting up the dose. Basically, the way I approached it was, because right at the end, it was basically like I was running 4 to 6 IUs a day consistently in my post-show phase, slowly titrated up because obviously you don't really have it in at the end of contest prep. And then I worked up to 6, which was the highest I'd ever run it. I'd never ran it past like 3 IUs a day prior to contest prep and whatnot. But yeah, ran up to 6 IUs a day for my post-show rebound. And then 2 weeks before moving to Thailand, I had a lot to use up. So I ran 15 IUs a day. I was taking 4 IUs pre-bed, 2 IUs in the morning fasted, like fasted cardio. I'm terrible at math in the middle of the night. So 6 IUs, I got
6.
another 9 left. Yeah. And then basically I had them with my pre-workout meal and then post-workout meal. And then I also had it again with my dinner meal, basically. So I was having it like pretty spaced throughout the day. The biggest, well, I wouldn't say the biggest dose, but like one of the biggest doses before bed. And then the post-workout doses were the next biggest. And then, just a smaller dose before fasted cardio, which I wake up in the middle of the night to go to the toilet. So I just take it then when I take my T4 because I'm on thyroid replacement therapy. So that, and then basically the dinner time one, which was like 2 IUs. So that's how I split it up. And I got heavier in that time frame, and I did get I felt I got a bit of localized growth in the areas that I was injecting around training. And I also got leaner. Like I actually had glute striations, and I gained, I think, in pounds. I'm trying to think of the conversion. It was about 4 kilos. 4 kilos over 2 weeks, so about 9 pounds.
Yeah.
But I got leaner.
A lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot of
which
muscle.
it blew my mind, and it was with generics. So people who say generics don't work, I think that's a bit of a, I suppose, proof in the pudding that they actually do.
Yeah. Well, we were talking about that, the video that we did on Chase's channel yesterday. You can find it's on Chase Irons. If anyone's looking for it, it's on Chase Irons video. We were talking about Ceristim specifically, and the consensus we were working through was that Ceristim was better than the other brands. That seems to be the case, but regardless of that statement, it doesn't mean the other ones don't work, right? It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the other ones. And I think the biggest dictator is I get a lot of questions if generic stuff is worth taking. I think you'll know if it's real by your results. I don't think you can just make an assumption about brands or generics or black tops or blue tops or whatever. I think the proof is in the pudding, right? If you took growth hormone, generic or not, and you gained 9 pounds and 4 kilos, clearly it's working and it's real. Versus if you took that same amount of some other brand and it doesn't really net anything, clearly it's not good, right? I think that to me is the easiest way to tell if something's working or not. And we found that Cerestim seems to be the most reliable, at least in the United States, probably because it's made here and it's not being transported anywhere. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily that it's any better of a product than anything else. I think it's more of just a freshness and a handling thing than anything else. They all start at 191 amino acid, regardless of what they are, assuming it's real. Right. So, I mean, I'm agreeing with you. I think that there's nothing wrong with generics per se. It's probably just in how they're handled. And what milligram doses, where Cerestim is 6 milligrams per vial. If a generic starts as 4 milligrams and then it sits in a hot shipping container for 3 months, perhaps it's like 2 milligrams by the time it arrives at someone's door. In that case, yeah, it's going to be weak. But you can also find generics that are very strong.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, the big thing as to the reason why people might notice, say, better results with Cerestim or even just any kind of pharmaceutical in general, like you kind of said, one, if it's made locally, less transit, less likelihood of it being damaged in that transport process. Then on top of that too, Cerestim, I believe it dissolves quicker, whereas you get generics, they don't dissolve as quickly. And I mean, if you're taking Cerestim, you can probably administer it not too soon after reconstituting it, whereas generics, you're meant to let it sit for about an hour before you actually administer it. And I think a lot of people who are taking generics are probably not letting it sit and mix, and so they're not actually getting the actual product. They're not, it's not active yet, so they're just injecting this like undissolved growth hormone, and it's just sitting in that subcutaneous layer, and they wonder, oh, I'm getting no effects. Well, maybe don't be an idiot and actually let it dissolve for an hour. So I think not letting it dissolve, that sort of thing. So the actual constitution not taking place, or the reconstitution, the handling. So heat damage from movement, and then on top of that as well, just not taking into account, like you've said in the past, Cerestim being a higher concentration per vial. And if you don't do your math right, you might be taking more IUs of Cerestim than you are from a generic if you assume that it's just the same like water to vial ratio.
So like the standard, so people watching this can get it, what you're talking about is the standard equation is 3 IU should equal 1 milligram for most growth hormone. That's at least the way it should be. Like, is that the way you do the math?
Yes,
that's the way I typically look at it. So Cerestim, for instance, needs to be diluted with 1.8 mLs of water in order to keep that equation the same, versus a lot of the generics need just 1 ml of water. So I know people that have used Cerestim and they've used 1 ml of water, and they'll take 2 units and they'll think it's substantially stronger. Well, of course it is, because the concentration's much higher. It's 50% higher than the other stuff. And the dissolving fast thing is interesting too, because Cerestim was designed for immediate use, versus the generics weren't necessarily designed with any specific use in mind. Right. So like the instructions for Cerestim basically have you dilute the entire bottle with somewhere between 0.5 and 1 ml of water, and then the entire bottle is injected immediately and then disposed of, versus the generics were not necessarily designed. They're not used for HIV. They're not used for these things. So there is no specific manufacturing process. Right. So whatever Cerestim is using in the bottling process is different from the other brands. Right. I don't know if they're using not as many agents to help dissolve. They do tend to sit. There is more sediment at the bottom from what I've seen in the generic stuff.
Yeah, a lot more. And I mean, that's why I always have used or gone by the golden rule of let it sit in the fridge for an hour after you like reconstitute it. And that way it's fully dissolved. There's no bubbles at the top. Everything's all settled. There's no no clumps of powder in the bottom of the vial, and you're good to go. Don't just take whatever somebody else says for gospel about growth hormone or IGF-1. Like, do your own reading and take on board what we've kind of covered in this video, and use that maybe as a basis of information if you haven't really looked into it yet. And then dive into it further if you have any other questions or even like reach out to one of us, shoot us an email. And if you have something that you need a little bit of clarification on, maybe we can help you with it. If not, we can at least point you in the right direction.
Yep. So Nick and I are both coaches, and Nick's coaching information and YouTube channel and everything will be listed down below in his link tree. And you're on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
It's just at Coach Nicholas Weir. Yep. So it's basically my name or coach and then my name. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Nick. We will see you in a week.
Yeah.